Dear learners, all of you at some point of time would have switched on your television sets and seen horrifying news, videos, and images of earthquakes, floods, famines, hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. Such natural disasters have a devastating impact on living beings, including man and animals alike. Houses are destroyed, people are displaced, lives of loved ones are lost. It is important to learn about how to manage these disasters. So now, let us look at what is meant by a disaster. A disaster is an ecological disruption located in time and space which produces conditions whereby the continuity of structure and process of social units becomes problematic. It is an event or series of events which seriously disrupts normal activities. It occurs when hazards meet vulnerability. It adversely impacts human and environment on an overwhelming scale and requires outside support to restore normalcy. WHO defines disaster as any occurrence that causes damage, ecological disruption, loss of human life, deterioration of health and health services on a scale sufficient enough to warrant an extraordinary response from outside the affected community or area. In this respect, proper strategies of preparedness, mitigation, and prevention of disasters are necessary to be implemented in order to reduce the adverse environmental impacts and loss of life and property. Now, these disasters can be either natural or man made. Let us look at how disasters can be classified. The disasters can be either natural disasters or man-made disasters. Let us look at them one by one. Natural disasters refer to the geological or weather-related events caused by natural forces that often has a significant effect on human populations. For example, the examples of such events are earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, floods, forest fires, droughts, etc. All these can have devastating effect on human lives, property, and environment. The resulting loss depends on the capacity of the population to endure or resist the disaster and their resilience. Let us look at some of the natural disasters. The first one is landslides and avalanches. Landslides and avalanches are defined according to the size or type of debris generated, distance moved, the speed of flow, and underlying geology. They refer to the discrete downslope movement of rock and soil masses under gravitational influence along a failure zone. Movement caused by gravity may be gradual, which may lead to tilting of trees, poles, etc. Landslides usually occur in mountainous areas. Although the action of gravity is the primary driving force for a landslide to occur, there are other contributing factors affecting the original slope stability. A landslide may move soil in amounts ranging from a few cubic meters to several cubic kilometers, which may block a stream, create a new lake, or cover a small town or highways. For example, Kerala recorded a maximum number of landslides in India from 2015 to 2022. The landslide in August 1999 buried scores of people in Rudraprayag, Ukhimat, and parts of Dehradun. Mapa village in Pithoragarh district was completely wiped out. Death due to landslides is reported from hilly and mountainous areas regularly. For example, landslide disasters met by pilgrims on the annual trek to Kailash Mansarovar. The second one is earthquakes. Stress in the earth's crust can cause solid rock to deform elastically until it suddenly fractures and is displaced along the fracture, producing a fault. Earthquakes set up shock waves that radiate out from the center of the movement. The focus is the point of initial movement and the epicenter is the point on the surface directly above the focus. The primary effects of earthquakes include shaking and sometimes permanent vertical or horizontal displacement of ground. These effects may have serious consequences on people and property. The secondary effects of earthquake include various types of mass wasting, urban fires, flooding due to subsidence of land, etc. Earthquakes can cause extensive damage. An earthquake impact cannot be predicted. It depends on its magnitude, intensity, duration, ground movement frequency, geological and soil conditions of the place, and the time of occurrence. It also depends on factors like local population density and the quality of structures. For example, the devastating earthquake of Gujarat in 2001 registered 7.9 on Richter scale, killed more than 20,000 people, injured 1,67,000 and left 6 lakh people homeless. It was the second largest earthquake recorded in India, the largest being in 1737 and was the worst natural disaster in India in more than 50 years. The third one is volcanic eruptions. Volcanic eruption is another example of natural terrestrial disaster. Volcanoes are vents or openings in the Earth's surface through which melted rock called magma and gases are expelled. The volcanic eruptions can be disastrous and damage the ecosystems of the surrounding areas extensively because they destroy human settlements, agricultural farms, kill people and animals, and destroy property. Enormous quantities of dust and ashes emitted into the sky during volcanic eruptions have been associated with weather and climatic changes at regional and global levels. It is also believed that volcanic eruptions and fallouts of dust and ashes and accompanying acid rain cause large-scale destruction of plants and animals and also extinction of a few. Today, there are more than 600 active volcanoes around the world. Most of these are located in an area called the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire forms a ring-like pattern of volcanoes in the Pacific Ocean. The fourth natural disaster we are going to discuss is floods. Flooding is the inundation of extensive land areas with water for several days in continuation. It is a natural phenomenon and is a response to rainfall, but it becomes a disaster when it causes colossal loss to human lives and property. Heavy rainfall for long period in continuation is the root cause of river floods. Blocking of natural flow of rivers by landslides caused by earthquakes and other natural and anthropogenic factors and clearance of such blockades causes sudden severe flash floods in the downstream section of the river. Similarly, breaches in the dams constructed across the river also cause devastating floods downstream. The most notorious rivers of the world in terms of devastating floods and resultant damage to natural environment and loss to human lives and property are the Ganga, Yamuna, Brahmaputra, Mahanadi, Krishna, Godavari, Narmada, Luni and Mahi. The fifth one is the tsunamis. Tsunami is a Japanese word meaning harbor waves. They are ocean waves produced by earthquakes or underwater landslides. It is actually a series of waves that can travel at speed from 400 to 600 miles per hour in the open ocean. Usually, wave heights are of 10 to 20 feet high and can be very destructive and cause many deaths and injuries. Apart from loss of lives, other associated risks to tsunamis include flooding, contamination of drinking water, fires from ruptured gas lines and tanks, and loss of vital community infrastructure. Additionally, adverse environmental conditions left by the tsunamis may contribute to the transmission of the diseases like diarrhea, cholera, dysentery, hepatitis, typhoid, malaria, plague, etc. from contaminated floodwater as well as from the disease vectors. Recent example from India is the tsunami of 26 December 2004, in which 17,000 people lost their lives. Now the sixth one is cyclonic storms. The term cyclone refers to all classes of storms with low atmospheric pressure at the center and are formed when an organized system of revolving winds clockwise in the southern hemisphere, anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere, develops over tropical waters. The tropical cyclones are variously called in different parts of the globe as hurricanes in North Atlantic Ocean, typhoons in North Pacific Ocean, cyclones in India and Bangladesh, and Willy Willy in Australia. Cyclones are classified on the basis of the average speed of the wind near the center of the systems as tropical depression with wind speed up to 61 kilometers per hour, tropical storms when the wind speed is between 61 kilometers per hour to 115 kilometers per hour, and hurricanes when the wind speed is greater than 115 kilometers per hour. A hurricane is a low pressure, large scale weather system which derives its energy from the latent heat of condensation of water vapor over warm tropical areas. A mature hurricane may have a diameter ranging from 150 to 1000 kilometers with sustained wind. For example, the strongest and most notorious cyclone in Andhra coast on May 9, 1990, it was 25 times stronger than the most disastrous and deadliest cyclone of November 1977, which claimed the lives of thousands of people. The seventh one is droughts and famines. Droughts are more deadly natural environmental disasters as it is directly related to the basic essentials for supporting life, that is water. A drought exists when rainfall is 70% below average for at least 21 days. Droughts cause extensive and enormous damage to agriculture and natural vegetation and therefore cause famine and starvation for human and animal population of the affected region. Droughts, apart from being a natural event, can also be caused by human activities. Overgrazing and deforestation can decrease rainfall in downwind areas. Now, having discussed the natural disasters, let us now come to man-made disasters. The man-made disasters are caused through a variety of human activities, both of intentional and unintentional character. The first one is fire and accidents. Bushfires, forest fires, and mine fires are generally started by lightning, but fire accidents can also be caused due to human negligence or criminal intention to cause damage or arson. They can burn extensive areas and kill people. If a fire intensifies enough to produce its own winds, it will form into a firestorm. Accidents, including road, rail, and aviation mishaps, turn disastrous when it involves substantial loss of life and property. For example, the most devastating is the disaster of 2001 when two separate United Airlines planes hit the World Trade Center minutes apart. The total number of fatalities include passengers and crew on both the planes, and those killed on the ground totaled to 2,907 people. The second man-made disaster is chemical and nuclear mishaps. Dumping of toxic chemical substances in the ground may become hazardous to subsequent colonization of the area. Spilling of immense quantity of crude oil from oil tankers into the seawater causes rapid rate of spreading of oil slicks which create havoc for marine organisms, and the human population faces the shortage of food supply. A great marine disaster was created because of leakage of 1 lakh tons of crude oil from a huge oil tanker which struck the Spanish coast near the port of La Coruna and exploded on May 12, 1976. When nuclear weapons are detonated or nuclear contaminant systems are otherwise compromised, airborne radioactive particles, also called the nuclear fallouts, can scatter and irradiate large areas. Not only is it deadly, but it also has a long-term effect on the next generation for those who are contaminated. The Soviet Republic of Ukraine and Belarus are part of a scenario like this after a reactor at Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a meltdown in 1986. To this day, several small towns and cities of Chernobyl remain abandoned and uninhabitable due to the fallout. The Bhopal gas poisoning is an extreme example of chemical mishap where over 30,000 people were killed and the ill effects are still persisting. The third one is epidemics and pandemics. Epidemic is an outbreak of an illness or disease in which the number of individual cases significantly exceeds the usual or expected number of cases in any given population. In 1994, a pneumonic plague epidemic broke out in Surat, Gujarat, where it resulted in 52 deaths and a large internal migration of about 3 lakh residents who fled fearing quarantine. A pandemic is an illness or disease outbreak of global proportions. It happens when a novel virus emerges among humans and it causes serious illnesses and is easily human transmissible. As people today are highly internationally mobile, the pandemic virus would spread rapidly around the world. Moreover, several months would be needed before any vaccine becomes available because pandemic viruses are new ones. Additionally, there would be sudden and potential considerable shortages of personnel to provide vital community services as the illness becomes widespread and threatening. We have all witnessed the havoc wreaked by COVID-19 pandemic, which not only led to loss of life and livelihoods, but also weakened the economy of many countries. Now let us discuss India's vulnerability to hazards and disasters. On the basis of geographic and climatic conditions, India can be divided into 5 zones according to its disaster proneness to natural events. The first one is Northern Mountain region including foothills. This region is prone to strong snowstorms leading to landslides and strong cold waves, and also is earthquake prone belt with violent subterranean volcanic activity. The second one is the Indo-Gangetic plains. Here, heavy rains during monsoon make these plains vulnerable to floods. The third one is the Deccan Plateau, which is a drought prone area. The fourth one is the Western Desert or the Thar Desert, which is again a drought prone area. And the fifth one is the coastal areas. They are prone to sea erosion, cyclones, tidal waves, etc. Now, having discussed all these things, let us now discuss at what are the major effects of disasters. Some of the common effects of disasters include deaths, severe injuries requiring extensive treatment, increased risk of communicable diseases, damage to health facilities, damage to water systems, food shortages, population movements, etc. Now, the health problems common to all disasters are social reactions, communicable diseases, population displacements, climatic exposures, food and nutrition, water supply and sanitation, mental health, damage to health infrastructure. Now let us discuss about disaster management. Having discussed about different kinds of disasters, we need to know how to manage these disasters. There are several phases of disaster management. Disaster management includes all the activities, strategies, programs and measures which can be taken up before, during and after a disaster with the purpose to avoid a disaster, reduce its impact and to recover from its losses. The 4 fundamental aspects of disaster management are preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. These aspects correspond to the 3 phases of disaster cycle, which are: first one is the pre-disaster phase, involving activities of risk reduction before a disaster occurs. The second one is the disaster occurrence phase, which involves relief activities undertaken during an emergency. And the third one is the post-disaster phase, which involves recovery activities undertaken in response to a disaster with a purpose to achieve early resurgence and rehabilitation of the affected communities. Now let us discuss the various phases of disaster management. The first phase is preparedness. The objective of disaster preparedness is to ensure that appropriate systems, procedures and resources are in place to minimize loss of life, disruption of critical services and damage when the disaster occurs, and to provide prompt, effective assistance to disaster victims, thus facilitating relief measures and rehabilitation services. Disaster preparedness is an ongoing process to carry out the following activities. First one is to evacuate the risk of the country or particular region to disasters. Second one is to adopt proper safety standards and regulations. Third one is to organize communication, information and warning systems. Fourth one is to ensure coordination and response mechanisms. And the fifth one is adopt measures to ensure that financial and other resources are available for increased readiness and can be mobilized when a disaster occurs. Sixth one is to develop public education programs. Seventh one is to coordinate information sessions with news media. The eighth one is organize disaster stimulation exercises that test response and mechanisms. And the ninth one is organize health sector disaster preparedness plan and outline clear mechanisms for coordinating with other sectors and internationally. The pre-disaster preparedness and efforts to minimize environmental damage is the key to poverty reduction, ecological security, and mitigation and management of weather and water-related natural disasters. This in turn supports sustainable development by reducing the impact of human activities on environment. After preparedness, the next phase of disaster management is response. Disaster response includes the mobilization of the necessary emergency services and first responders in the disaster area. This is likely a first wave of core emergency services such as firefighters, police and ambulance crews. It may commence with search and rescue operations, but in all cases, the focus will quickly turn to fulfilling the basic humanitarian needs of the affected population. On a personal level, the response can take the shape either of a shelter in place or an evacuation. Organizational response to any significant disaster, human or natural or human induced, is based on existing emergency management and organizational systems and processes. Now, the next phase is recovery. The aim of recovery phase is to restore the affected area to its previous state, and it starts after the immediate threat to human life after the disaster has subsided. Recovery activities differ from the response activities in its focus. Recovery efforts are concerned with issues and decisions that must be made after immediate needs are addressed. Recovery efforts are primarily concerned with actions that involve rebuilding destroyed property, rehabilitation, re-employment, and the repair of other essential infrastructures. An important aspect of effective recovery efforts is taking advantage of a window of opportunity for the implementation of mitigation measures that might otherwise be unpopular. The citizens of the affected area are more likely to accept any mitigation changes when a recent disaster is fresh in their memory. The next step is mitigation. It is virtually impossible to prevent occurrence of most natural disasters, but it is possible to minimize or mitigate their damage effects. Mitigation embraces measures taken to reduce both the effects of the hazards and the vulnerability in order to reduce the scale of a future disaster. Examples of mitigation measures which are hazard specific include water management in drought prone areas, relocating people away from hazard prone areas, and by strengthening structures to reduce damage when a hazard occurs. In addition to these physical measures, mitigation also aims to reducing the economic and social vulnerabilities of potential disasters. Mitigation measures can be structural or non-structural. The structural measures use technological solutions, and the non-structural measures include legislation, land use planning, and insurance. In addition to these physical measures, mitigation also aims to reducing the economic and social vulnerabilities of potential disasters. The mitigation programs will direct the following activities. First is identify areas exposed to natural disasters and determine the vulnerability of key elements, health facilities, and water systems, etc. Second one is to coordinate the work of multidisciplinary teams in designing and developing of safety standards. Third one is hospitals must remain operational to attend the disaster victims and have additional space to manage the high number of medical casualties. Include disaster mitigation measures in the planning and development of new facilities. Then identify priority hospitals and critical health facilities that comply with current building codes and standards. Then ensure that mitigation measures are taken into account in a facility's maintenance plans. Inform, sensitize, and train those personnel who are involved in planning, administration, operation, maintenance, and use of disaster mitigation facilities, and to promote the inclusion of disaster mitigation in the curricula of professional training institutes. So, dear learners, in this session, we have learned about disasters and their types. We discussed at length about the natural and man-made disasters. We also discussed the effects of major disasters, and finally, we discussed disaster management and the phases of disaster management. Hope you learned many new concepts from this discussion. Thank you.